Chapter 36. Day 6. 0800 hours. Grabadon killed. Level 15. Plus 2500 experience divided by 2. Plus 1250 experience. Grabadon leather pants obtained. Light armor. Level 15. Rarity. Unique. Plus 25 armor. Plus 2 intelligence. Plus 2 lesser fireball. Cameron looked over at Floof, and the two couldn't help but shake their heads in disappointment. Frank was gone, dragged under the ground by the Grabadon. Both knew there was little hope of ever reclaiming his corpse or crystal.
"It is with great pain that I suggest we move onward,"
Floof sighed.
"Frank is lost. I doubt we will ever find his body."
I hate it. Cameron groaned about the thought of leaving anyone behind. But you're right.
"Frank,"
Floof sighed.
"Whoa, you really were a good guy. Godspeed, my friend."
At that, Cameron and Floof continued their journey through the storm. We're almost there, Cameron said as they walked. Just over this hill. The duo climbed to the top of the hill and looked down. There it was. What remained of the calamitous Rexus's corpse had been battered and ripped apart by the storm. Large chunks of flesh and a significant amount of exposed bone were all that was left. Cameron nodded at Floof, and the two walked down the hill. As they approached the calamitous Rexus, Cameron couldn't help but feel a weird sense of nostalgia. It had only been 3 days since he had last been there, but it felt like it could have only been hours ago. Everything was happening so fast and so aggressively that it was difficult to keep his mind clear. Cameron was ready for some sense of normalcy, for any kind of break.
"I'm not exactly certain what we are looking for,"
Floof commented as they searched the area.
"Your body was ripped apart by the explosion. I doubt there will be much of anything left."
Cameron ignored Floof and walked toward the head of the beast. He was not going to stop looking until he found what he had come for. As he drew closer, he noticed something just a bit beyond the dead calamitous Rexus. It was a strange blue glow of some kind. Curiously, he marched toward it. "Over here!" Cameron shouted as he approached the light. It was a glowing treasure chest of sorts. It looked like the one he and Hank had found in the forest so long ago, the one in which they found their first few items.
"What do you mean?"
Floof asked as he joined Cameron.
"I don't see anything."
"Really?" Cameron asked as he knelt and pointed to the chest. "It's right here."
"Either you are completely delusional,"
Floof said slowly,
"or only you can see it."
Cameron hummed and reached toward the chest. He opened it, and inside were his belongings. "Yes!" Cameron shouted. He dug through, eagerly searching for the sack that held the crystals. He couldn't find it. Perhaps it was hidden behind something. He searched again. "Where are you?" Cameron asked aloud as he sorted the items more frantically. Finally, he began tossing the armor out of the chest until nothing was left. It was empty. His bag of crystals was not there. "No," Cameron snapped as he looked around on the ground. "There's no way!"
"What?"
Floof asked. He saw the armor littering the ground.
"What's wrong?"
"They're not here!" Cameron shouted. "The fucking crystals aren't here!"
"Oh,"
Floof replied.
"Oh, that's bad."
Cameron paced frantically, searching the ground for his bag of crystals. It was nowhere to be seen. It was just gone. "God fucking damn it!" Cameron shouted. He stomped his foot into the ground and cursed as the rage built up inside him. "She's gone! She's fucking gone!"
"Now, let's not get apocalyptic,"
Floof gently said.
"Perhaps there is another explanation."
"What other explanation could there be?" Cameron snapped back. "You can't loot crystals from someone's inventory. You—" He paused as a thought entered his head. "Wait a minute." The bag that the crystals were stored in had been Stephen's. Stephen had handed it over when Cameron had knocked him back when they last fought. The bag itself was not a crystal. It was just a container. Cameron's eyes opened wide and he looked at Floof. "Stephen," Cameron growled. "Stephen has my crystals."
How on earth could Stephen?
"He gave me the bag," Cameron shouted. "The bag's not a crystal. It can be looted." Cameron was furious. "If he has the bag, we have to get back to the other sleuth. We have to get back now." Stephen stepped out of his exosuit and walked toward the main entrance of the resurrection sphere with Horton following closely. The sun had risen and the carnage behind him was finally illuminated. There were only 17 people left living, and Stephen was intent on reducing that number to 10. He walked through the doorway and smiled when he saw Gino and Andreas standing with 7 other people behind them. Gino had his axe held in front of him, and Andreas had 2 SMGs pointed Stephen's way. "Good morning, mates," Stephen smiled. "You come to help me win this game?"
"We've come to stop this,"
Gino growled as he gripped his weapon tightly.
"You betrayed us, Stephen. That cannot be forgiven."
"Lucky for you blokes, I don't need forgiveness," Stephen spat back. "I only need 10 people. Once that's done, we can all just relax and wait for the end of this."
"That's not the plan,"
Gino yelled.
"We're going to build a new world here, a world where people like us can live happily."
"People like us," Stephen snorted. "You know nothing about me, little man. Look, mate, I'm giving you the opportunity to stand behind me. You don't want to stand in front of me anymore. Do you understand?"
"Fuck you!"
Gino shouted as he charged forward. He swung his axe, and Stephen hopped out of the way, laughing at the poor sap. "The end, then!" Stephen raised a wall between the other 7 people, leaving Gino and Andreas alone with Horton and himself. Gino swiped at Stephen a few more times, and Andreas began unloading his guns on both Horton and Stephen. Stephen lifted his ethereal shield, blocking the bullets from hitting him, and used his level 20 power strike ability on Gino. His hammer crashed into Gino's body and knocked him in one hit. Stephen threw his head back and laughed as Andreas dove out of the way of a fireball from Horton. "You stupid little fuck," Stephen tisked as he knelt down and looked at Gino. "You had a good run, I'll give you that. But now, well, understand, I'm truly sorry for this." Stephen raised his hammer and crashed it down on Gino's skull, splattering his brains on the floor beneath them. As he got to his feet, he turned his attention to Andreas. Andreas jumped and leaped off the wall, sending a kick squarely into Horton's head. Horton flew backward, and Andreas emptied his weapons on the man, knocking him.
"I'm getting good at this,"
Andreas declared as he started stomping his foot against Horton's body.
"Put me in a cage. That wasn't very nice."
Horton finally collapsed on the floor, and Andreas kept kicking.
"Help!"
Horton shouted.
"Stephen, please!"
"You're fucking useless, mate," Stephen sighed. "Andreas, how do you feel about going back to Earth?" Andreas looked up at Stephen, who stood ready to strike, and nodded his head.
"Really?"
Andreas asked.
"We can go back?"
"We sure can, my friend," Stephen said, trying to appeal to Andreas's childlike personality. "You can go back home and be rich and famous. All you have to do is work with me, and I will make it happen." Andreas looked at Horton and then back up to Stephen. Finally, he smiled, revealing his pearly white teeth, and pulled his sidearm from his hip. He pointed the weapon down at Horton and squeezed the trigger.
"Sounds good, cowboy,"
Andreas said as he accepted Stephen's party invite. At that, Stephen took his walls down, and the 7 people behind them all looked down at Gino's dead body. Stephen stepped forward and cocked his head. "I'm not looking to kill any of you," he said. "Just join my party. Go upstairs, wipe out the others, then we can all go home. How does that sound?" The 7 people all looked around at each other, and after a few moments, they all nodded and stepped forward. "Welcome to the new Slayers, then." Name pending. Maria watched as Gino's picture faded and Andreas left their party. It was only she and Bernard left, and based on the sounds coming from downstairs, she knew they had to get out of there.
"Come on, old man,"
she said as she knelt down to help Bernard up off the floor.
"We need to get out of here."
"Go on, Miss Maria," Bernard said as he grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. "You save yourself. I will only slow you down. Run. Go far away and hide until this wretched game is over."
Bernard, you know I can't do that, Maria whispered. I can't leave you behind. Not again. But you must, Bernard insisted. I am old. I have lived my life. I have discovered my way. I am prepared to die, for I know my God has wonderful plans for me, even after death. I beg of you, Maria, go. Find happiness. Live a life worth living. You cannot put yourself in danger because of me. Maria stared down at the one-legged man, and tears welled up in her eyes. She leaned in and planted a kiss on Bernard's forehead, and he wrapped his arms around her in a fatherly embrace. Go, Bernard whispered. At that, she hurried toward the stairs that led upward. She looked at Bernard and briefly smiled before she activated her stealth camouflage skill and disappeared. When she was gone, Bernard opened his premium store menu. Quickly, he repurchased the armor he had lost when he was killed and also a long, curved scimitar. As he equipped his armor and weapon, he could feel his heart pounding. Call upon me, and I will respond to you, he whispered as he used his sword to push himself up off the ground. He has made me blessed wherever I am. Whoever puts all his trust in Allah, he will be enough for him. Tears streamed down the old man's face as he grunted and summoned a small wall to balance his half-leg on. Verily, the hereafter will be better for thee than the present. Bernard summoned 2 walls that created a narrow corridor from the top of the stairs to his position. He eased himself down the corridor, using his sword as support, and finally stopped 5 feet from the foot of the stairs. He summoned another wall to support his leg and readied his sword. My success can only come from Allah, he whispered as sweat and tears dripped down his face. Indeed, Allah is with those who fear him and those who are doers of good. The first person charged up the stairs, and Bernard quickly lifted his ethereal shield in front of him, blocking the incoming axe strike. His sword flashed through the air, hitting his enemy and knocking him back. Bernard blocked another attack and successfully landed another strike on his enemy. Back! He shouted. Back, you! He threw a health regen boon down behind him as his opponent growled and charged forward again. Bernard quickly deflected his attack and stuck his sword up through the man's lower jaw, doing critical damage. He fell to the ground, knocked, and the person behind him opened fire with an automatic weapon on Bernard. A few bullets struck Bernard before he could raise his shield to protect himself further. He quickly threw up a wall from underneath the shooter, slamming his body against the ceiling and pinning him there. After catching his breath, he looked down at the player he had knocked and swiped at him with his scimitar, killing him. The other pounded against the wall, and Bernard watched as chips of it began to fly off. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, trying to stay in control of at least that. Finally, he closed his eyes and said a quick prayer as the walls crumbled to the ground. And he is with me wherever I am. Day 6, 2000 hours. Jasmine and Alexa made it over the hill with Floof and Cameron riding shotgun. The storm was hot on their heels, and a trail of dead monsters was behind them. The monsters had slowed them down, damaged their vehicles, and done everything they could to hinder the party's progress. Cameron watched the whole time as members of his party had died or left the group. Stephen, no doubt, was the root of it all. They had been double-crossed by the man. He had used them to survive until everyone was bunched up, and then he killed everyone. Cameron felt he himself was to blame, but he knew that was nonsense. Survivor's regret. He couldn't help but feel it. As Jasmine slowed the vehicle to a stop, he hopped out and looked at the valley below. Bodies of players and monsters were everywhere. The ground was stained with blood of all colors. He saw weapons and armor gleaming in the setting sunlight. 12 players and 28 hours remained. Cameron stood in silence as he stared down at the resurrection sphere. He could end it all now. He could charge in, murder everyone inside the sphere, kill Stephen, and take his bag of crystals back. The people he would revive would bump the player count back to where they could stay safely. But then he looked over at his friends. They were tired, worn out, and used up. Nearly everyone they cared about on Happy Island was dead, and most likely not coming back. Cameron had to make the right decision. He had to take care of his people. "Rest," Cameron forced himself to say. "I need you guys to rest. Tomorrow morning, that's when we strike. It may be a long fight. It could be a short one. I don't know, but we need to be in our best."
Are you certain that is the best course of action, Cameron?
Floof asked.
What if they attack us in the night?
"They won't," Cameron replied quickly. "Stephen is smart. He won't climb a hill to fight us at night. He's probably telling his people the same thing I just told you guys."
We will take turns keeping watch then,
Floof said.
You have the Eternials at your back, Cameron. A builder, a gatherer, and a scout. I'm a hunter, not a scout,
Jasmine said.
Yes, a builder, a gatherer, and a hunter,
Floof corrected himself, not skipping a beat. "Thank you, guys," Cameron said softly as he turned around to face them. "Now, get some rest. Tomorrow will be the most important day we've ever lived."